What's going on? Welcome back to Frenchie's Forge. In today's video, we're going to be finishing up the TBW Damascus billet blade. If it's your first time here, thanks for stopping by. And if you're not new to the channel, welcome again. In today's episode, we're going to be finishing this blade that we started in the last episode. I cannot wait to get this thing hardened, hand sanded, and etched to see what it looks like. And that is precisely what we're going to be doing in this episode. Before we jump into the heat treating of the blade, I want to finish drilling out the handle. As you can see, we have it pretty much marked out how we want it, but I still need to drill this out. So let's run down to the drill press. We'll get that handled first, and then we'll fire up the forge and get this sucker heat treated. Let's get into it. Now, one thing that I have already done is I have marked out where the tang is going to go, and you can see that with the line that I've scribed here. Because we're starting to drill in at an angle here, it's important to be able to get the right angle, if that makes sense. And I feel like the best way to do this without messing it up is to use the drill bit kind of as a guide, and you kind of just line it up until it gets where it needs to be. And then at that point, you can use either a clamp or, there's a drill press vise that they sell. I don't happen to actually have one. So what I tend to do is just clamp it to a piece of angle iron, which will help keep it in position as we drill our holes. And then as you get to the other side, you can adjust it some and so on and so forth. But that's a pretty cool trick if you need to drill a hole in, that's not straight down, or you don't have an even block on the bottom. For this first round of normalizing, you can see that I've got the forge cranked way down, and we've got a relatively good color on our blade. So what we're trying to do is simply hold that temperature. And a really good way to do that is by turning off the gas valve up here, and essentially just turns off the flame for a minute. And that way it's not getting any hotter. You really don't want to overshoot the temperature, and it's really easy to do in a forge. So by cycling it on and off, that kind of helps control the temperature. So for this first round, we're shooting for about 1600 degrees, and we're going to try to give it this hold time of at least 2 to 3 minutes. So we're just going to continue to turn on and off the forge for a few minutes, and then we'll pull it out and let it air cool. Alright, we have now reached 1500 degrees, and we're just going to cycle it on and off and attempt to hold that for a minute or so. And then we'll pull it out and let it air cool. And as you can see, we've got a pretty good even temperature. Bring this outside of the forge and let it air cool. This is about 1400 degrees. We are now right at the perfect temperature. So we are just going to hold it for a few more seconds and then we will quench it. And here we go into the oil. All right, so we're back inside. The quench went well. I think we got our temperatures pretty much on the money, and it came out in one piece, which is excellent. We did, however, develop a slight warp. You can pretty much pick that up almost instantly. And really, we're pretty good back here up until we get to the tip, and the tip goes way off to the side. So, you know, that just happens. That's kind of the nature of the beast. And I've learned my lesson from previous builds of trying to correct it straight after quenching it by bending it. The one time that I tried that, I waited too long and it had cooled down too much, and I ended up actually snapping the tang off. We're just going to give it a little bit of a So instead of trying all that shenanigans, I just let it be, let it cool down, and we're going to try to fix this in the temper. I'll just clamp it to a piece of angle iron and really put some pressure on it as it's heating up and tempering. Let's bring it down to the vise and get a file on it, remove some of this decarb on the edge, and we'll see just how hard it got. All right, so we've got it in the vise here. We're just going to be using a normal file to remove some of this decarb. We can now properly test it with our hardness testing files. This is a 60 HRC file, and we're looking for it to bite. And it is absolutely skating this 60. The next one that I have, and the hardest one that I have, is the 65. And the 65, although it's scratching it maybe a little, it's definitely not digging in very much. So it's safe to say that this has an HRC somewhere in between the 60 and the 65. And I'll probably look at my chart before I decide on the temperature, but we're shooting for maybe a 60 HRC. So we want to bring it down 2 or 3 degrees on the HRC scale. And hopefully it'll be a high enough temperature to be able to get this warp out. So let's go throw it in the oven and get this sucker going. So we're in here in the kitchen getting ready to do the second round of tempering, and I figured, you know what, I'm going to show this part just in case somebody out there runs into the same problem of exactly how to fix a warp during temper. I have an old piece of angle iron that I have put the knife up against, but you pretty much figure out where the warp is at, and you can use washers to kind of help persuade the metal back to where you want it to be. So I'm just going to tighten this one down as it heats up. So I might leave it in there for an hour and pull it out and crank this down more to pull the tip back in. And then same thing with the end of the tang down here, had just a slight warp. And we've got, what is that, 12 cents 12 cents back there. That's all it takes. So yeah, we're gonna go ahead and throw this back in the oven and get it back to being straight. You can see it's relatively close, you know, just a little bit more to go. Perfect. I am happy to report that we are now done hand sanding. I have this blade hand sanded up to 1,000 grit, and I spent in total about an hour hand sanding, compared to 3 or 4 hours is typically how much time I spend hand sanding. So the waterfall platen was definitely a major time saver. It really took a ton of time off of hand sanding. Now that we're good and polished up, we're ready to finish working on the handle pieces. And I want to try something a little different for this because I have 3 different pieces plus the wood block. I want to try to use some lineup pins this time. It's something I've never done before, and to my understanding, it helps keep all of your pieces right where you want them. And then that way, if we have some lineup pins, we won't have to worry about these things getting shifted around. You can see there's a little bit of play in them, and hopefully they'll be able to line right up right where we want them. So to do that, I have a little itty bitty tiny piece of brass. This is 75 thousandths is the diameter of this, and I have a drill bit that is it's 5/64, which is 75 thousandths. So we're going to drill a couple of holes in the back of the brass for the lineup pins, and then we'll be able to match up our pieces for that. I'll probably actually drill them into these 2 pieces first and then put it back over top, and I'll be able to see where the brass is once I get this part situated, then drill through the brass. And then I'll be cutting those pins down to yay long, and then that way they're sticking up out of this G10 just a little bit for them to go into the wood block. So there we go. That's what we're going to do. And will it work? I don't know. Hopefully. I've never done it before, but sometimes that's just what you have to do. You just have to try it and see if it's worth doing. So let's go ahead and we'll drill those holes and we'll get all these pieces lined up. Okay, now that I have a couple of holes drilled in this spacer piece, what I've done now is I have put the guard back on, and I've put just a couple of dots of the blue layout fluid on the back. And now we can slide this back on over. We can get relatively close to where we want it because there's a little bit of play in this. You know, we want to make sure that it's where we want it. And then when it is, we're going to use this little scribing tool to just go in and touch where those holes are going to be. And hopefully that will do the job. As I have never done this before, so I'm just trying to do it in a way that makes sense to me. There might be an easier way to do this, like temporarily super gluing the pieces together would probably work. I just don't like to do that if I can avoid it. So now that we've got that seated on there and we've got it pressed down, like I said, just going to use this little scribe tool to just kind of mark on the brass. Yeah, so it's very faint, but you can see where the scribe tool touched, and that will give me just kind of a rough idea of where to drill this first hole. And once I get the first one drilled, we'll be able to stick the little pin into it, and then we'll be able to drill our second one. All right, so I've also set up my drill press and the stopper on my drill press so that it will only go in, you know, just a wee bit, and that it'll be consistent on both holes. All right, so just like that, we have our first hole done. All right, so after taking a little bit more time to mess around with these lineup pins, we got the 2 holes drilled into the handle piece here. And now we've got them lined up where we can put the spacer on and we can squeeze on the piece of brass. And now we're nice and lined up, and there's still a little tiny bit of play in there, but really nothing too bad. And we got our knife to fit right down in there, and for the most part we're relatively straight. So pretty cool trick. That definitely is something that I will try again in the future. And yeah, I think that will help big time when we go to kind of mess around with the handle and shaping things and stuff, and really gluing it up. What's cool about doing this is that now that we do have it lined up, I'll be able to trim down this piece ahead of time. That way I don't have to glue it all up, bring it back to the grinder, and try to be super careful to grind this down to get it down to the level of this without hitting this part. So it's just, it kind of helps you do a little work ahead of gluing it up. Okay, so while we have the blade hanging out in the coffee etching, we're going to work on kind of grinding this true stone piece down a little bit. You can see right now that it's sticking out proud of the brass underneath, but part of why I chose to do the lineup pins is to help with this situation so that I don't have to grind the True Stone piece by itself and try to guess how much to take off, I can utilize these pins and have it sitting next to the brass, and then that way I can know exactly how much I need to take off without digging into the brass. So I'm kind of over here looking at it from this view that you have, and I'm just checking this little gap down here and making sure that the brass isn't going to be touching the belt. So we're pretty much just going to go until it comes right up to the belt. So you can see we've got a lot to take off over here. So by utilizing these pins, that's going to help us do that. I'm going to go ahead and keep going over here. And the main objective is just to bring this spacer piece down to the same diameter as the brass. I've got a 240 grit belt on here, and it's running really slow, and that way I don't overshoot or take off too much at once.
And just like that, we now have a perfectly situated hole for the pin.
After many days messing around with the etch, we're now ready to move on, finally. I spent literally 4 days messing around with the etch on the blade. And I should be able to show you some pictures of the various stages of etching this thing and what it looked like. Just to give you a quick idea, in case you haven't been watching some of my posts and shorts and stuff, I attempted to etch this thing with my old ferric chloride and some really cheap coffee, and got an okay etch. It was etched and you could see the pattern, but it just didn't do this blade justice. I had Ted from TBW Blades reach out to me and sent me some new ferric chloride and some new coffee, and wow, what a difference it made. So typically you have to wait to the end of the video to see it, and homie, don't play that game. Let's go ahead and take a look, because that's just silly. You guys could fast forward to the end if you wanted to anyway. I always wondered why people do that. Oh, you gotta wait to the end to see the blade. Nah, let's just go ahead and show you what we got. And mainly too, because I want to kind of talk about it a little bit. In case you haven't really got to, keep an eye on my doings with this. So the very first etch, which I'll show here, so you can see there that it's pretty muddy, right? It's like it's somewhat etched, but it's pretty like spotty almost. So it looks etched, but not so great. And that's the whole reason why I decided I got to do something about this. So then I did a few more rounds of trying to do the fresh ferric chloride in combination with coffee. And I got it etched really good. Let's just go ahead and take this out of the block. I got it etched really good with the ferric chloride and then went to darken it with the coffee. However, when I did that, it made the entire blade dark, except for this silver line. And you might be looking at it now and think to yourself, wow, that's still pretty dark. And it kind of is, but if you get it in the light here, you can see that there's actually dark spots, gray spots, and then the silver. And it's kind of hard to pick it up in this lighting, but in person you can see it pretty clearly. And I was able to achieve that by doing a very light etch with the ferric chloride and then a super light amount of Nescafe Classico dark roast. And I think overall it looks pretty stinking good. And I think for the handle selection with the, kind of the darker wood grains in there, it's just going to look pretty cool, I think, when it's shaped out. I'm going to firstly start out by cutting out the profile from this view. So we're going to go ahead and remove a lot of this material with the bandsaw, and we might even trim up the top and maybe a little bit of the corner to try to achieve that arch first, and then we'll go ahead and start shaping and rounding and putting in the curves on the blade. Let's get it. Now that I have a slight taper put into the handle in this direction, kind of gets skinny towards the front, I'm now ready to kind of pre-shape this back. And never mind the crappy pencil lines here, we can pay attention to these 3 lines. And the reason I put those on there is to try to figure out where that little palm dip goes. So what I mean by that is when you grab a knife handle, you have this section right here of your hand that naturally has kind of a curve. And the last couple of knives that I've made, I've been trying to follow this idea. Really, it's kind of for like a more of a chopping knife, like the big chopper I just got done making. I did this same thing, and it really helps to kind of seat your hand in there. Although we won't be chopping with this knife, it still will help with kind of fitting to the curve of your hand, if that makes sense. So the best way to do that is to kind of just hold it in your hand, figure out where that curve of your palm is, and kind of where you want the, curve to be. So we kind of have a starting line, and, maybe the bottom is the finishing line. And so we just mark the middle of that. This would be the view that I am seeing while I'm grinding it. And to give you an idea of what I'm doing here is I'm using this middle line as my starting point to push into the wheel. That way I don't accidentally start pushing in here on this side and pushing, the other way on this side. It gives you that kind of line of reference to be able to push in equally on both sides. And really what you can kind of imagine is that the wheel is going to contour the wood in the shape of the wheel. And one thing you can do is just drop the handle down and stick it underneath of the wheel to kind of see where it's going to put that curve. And really that's that's a pretty good tip if you're not used to doing this style of handle, or you're new at shaping handles and you're trying to get some advice or tips, is to just know that whatever your platen is, whether it's a round wheel, a flat platen, or a small wheel, you're pretty much, grinding out the shape of whatever the belt is around. I know that seems like common sense, but I didn't really think about that until, later on in knife making. So for me in this handle, this is why I'm doing this. I'm doing a center line here to have a point of reference to start, and then we're shooting to get that little bit of a curve going on both sides evenly. So let's go ahead and get that done. And you can pretty much tell that it's right where the middle of this line is, so it works pretty well. The one thing that you can kind of look out for is making sure that you're applying equal equal pressure to the top and the bottom. Well, there you go. Another one done and in the books. I think that this thing turned out really, really cool. The blade has just an awesome pattern to it, and I couldn't be happier with the way that this turned out. It's really cool how it has the super light metal, almost that singular heartbeat style running through the middle of this thing, and then it has multiple shades of gray and black. If I can get it in the light a little bit better. It's kind of hard to pick it up in the light in here, but you can see it in person pretty easy. There's definitely different shades to this, kind of some grays and then some darker colored steels as well. So definitely turned out really, really cool. I think it's a unique combination of items. I really like the brass guard, the turquoise piece of true stone, and it all blends really well with the dark lines in the wood. It just looks really cool. I also shaped out this handle to have a palm swell in the middle, in that direction and in that direction, and you can really tell that it lends for a comfortable grip. It's something that I've been doing lately with my knives, is trying to experiment a little bit with shaping the handles, trying to figure out what handles work for what knives and what is the most comfortable style of handle to put on a knife. It really just depends, I guess, on what the knife is going to be used for and the size of the knife. But for something like this, I think that it suits the knife pretty well, and it's also incredibly comfortable. We were also able to achieve the arch on the top, which was something I was going for, along with this little hook on the back for your hand to seat on if you're going to be swinging this thing hard. I probably won't be swinging it hard, but you know, you could take this for the paces if need be. I was talking with Ted from TBW Blades, and we're going to get together and try to figure out a way for somebody to own this knife. Whether we do a raffle or some sort of a pool of our subscribers and pull a name out of a hat, I think that that would be really cool to be able to give it to one of you guys. And really, the only requirements to be eligible for this raffle would be to be subscribed to either him or me or both. And then we'd be able to put your name into a hat and pick one of you guys at random to win this thing. I will say too that YouTube is kind of strange. When you have a YouTube channel, you can see your subscribers, but not all of them. There's a feature on YouTube that allows YouTube to share your information publicly. So for the 1,500 subscribers that I have, I'm actually only able to see about 500 of them on my subscriber list. Now, I'm not sure how I would pick your name if I can't see your name. So be sure and be subscribed, but also make sure that your subscriptions are public to be able to be viewed by other channels and other people. I believe it's a setting that you can change pretty easily in the settings. I'll keep you guys posted and let you know when we'll be doing that. It will probably be here soon, and I'm excited to get this sent out to somebody. And I think it would be really cool to put my work out there and Ted's work out there and give it to somebody who's in need of a unique custom knife. Until then, I'm going to be hanging out with this thing, testing it out, and running it through the paces to make sure that it will hold up for the user. So that's really it for this one. Appreciate you guys watching as always. Thanks for staying to the end to check this thing out, and let me know what you think in the comments below. It really is pretty cool. I'm pretty pleased with the way that it turned out. Until next time, Frenchy Forge signing out.